Hello everyone and welcome to the next episode of Outside of Life, where I chat with inspiring artists and create various art-related videos. My name is Eva and my guest today is Armand Baltazar, and in this episode you will learn valuable tips for creating stories, building worlds, and why it's important to learn to present and communicate your ideas.
You have to present. What I think is oftentimes forgotten by people who want to be like concept artists on an animated team is that, your big job is to communicate. Your designs are communicating these ideas, these concepts, right? And so the person that you need to be able to communicate to your director. And the thing is you're establishing a dialogue and you're trying to draw out the things that they like. So it becomes this thing where besides drawing, you have to be able to present your work. And then while you're presenting it, be able to ask questions. And so what it is you're sort of communicating.
Armand is a background and visual development artist, an art director originally from Chicago, now living and working in California. He is most known for his great passion for narrative painting and pictures that tell story with feeling and design. Armand has worked with big studios such as Dreamworks, Walt Disney Feature Animation, and Pixar, and his credits include The Prince of Egypt, The Road to El Dorado, Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron, Sinbad, Shark Tale, and many more. He's also a creator of a new science fiction fantasy book series called Timeless, which will be adapted to a feature film in the future as well. And if you are not an Audible member yet, you can get it as a free audiobook. You can check it out on artsideoflife.com/timeless. And now let's welcome Armand Baltazar and let's get to the interview. Welcome everyone to the next episode of Outside of Life, and I'm super happy to have Armand here. Hi!
Hi, how are you, Iva?
Good. I'm super happy that you joined us and took time from your busy schedule. And let's just dive in right away to your background. And maybe let's start with a fun question, like how your childhood smelled like.
How my childhood smelled like?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. It smelled a lot like dried fish. If I had to pick a smell, so I'm Filipino. I'm a Filipino American, and my parents are immigrants to the United States from the Philippines. So my earliest memories of childhood was my mom cooking smoked fish or frying fish in the kitchen, because that was very popular Filipino food. So, and it was different from the other kids in the neighborhood growing up. So if I had to pick one smell to remind me of my childhood, it would probably be that.
Oh, that's really cool, yeah. And what were your creative outlets as a child? Did you draw on walls or something like that?
I did. I drew on everything. The thing is when I was a kid, I was really, unlike now, I was a really super shy, painfully shy kid. And, one of the weirdly funnest things I would do is go and hang out with my mom in the office, her office. She used to have an office job as a secretary, and I would play with the Xerox machine. And what I mean by that, it's like I would draw a character, and then I would draw like the character again in a couple of different poses, and I'd put it in the Xerox machine, a copy machine basically, copy it 100 times, and then make little armies and little groups of superheroes and stuff. And that was one of my fondest memories as a kid. And then also drawing on stuff I shouldn't and getting in a lot of trouble. I actually one time painted a picture on my dad's car, thinking I was using tempera paint that would wash off, and wasn't. And it wasn't. It was permanent paint, and I got in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, custom-made art,
Yeah, exactly. He had a custom-painted car, right?
Yeah, definitely. And when was the time you decided, okay, I want to take this as a career or seriously?
When I was a kid, all I loved to do was draw and paint. And probably around the time when I was around junior high school, right before I went to high school, my parents were really great because they sort of recognized my passion for artwork, and they encouraged it, and they said, you should keep doing this because you're really good and you love it. And I started thinking, with that encouragement, I was like, yeah, I want to do this, and I remember when I was a kid, all things visual stimulated me. Like I used to read children's books, and I remember the first couple of children's books that made me want to draw. One of them was Where the Wild Things Are. by Maurice Sendak. And then another one was the original Ferdinand the Bull. The pen and ink drawings, were like, oh my gosh, they were so beautiful. And so I knew from an early age that was the thing I loved. And so I would say probably, in elementary school going into high school, I realized that this is the thing that I want to do. One way or another. I didn't know how it was going to turn out, but I wanted to do that.
And who advised you maybe to do either go into animation, or how did you choose the field in artistic career?
Well, mostly I stumbled into my career, let me back up. So when I went to high school, I studied art, and I grew up in a city called Chicago, and in Chicago, the kind of art that was very popular that you can get a job in is advertising, commercial advertising. So my teacher in high school goes, look, if you want to work in the city, you have to go study advertising because those are the only kind of jobs there are. And so I thought, okay, so I did that. And I studied advertising, and I found out that after I studied it, that I really didn't like it. There's nothing wrong with advertising, but it wasn't what inspired me when I was a kid. I wanted to tell stories. I wanted to be like N.C. Wyeth, making paintings about pirates. I wanted to be Frank Frazetta, telling these sort of adventure stories and stuff. But instead, I was drawing and painting hot dogs and hamburgers and bottles of beer, and it wasn't the kind of art I wanted, And so I went back to school again after learning advertising to be a book illustrator. So I went to school in California at a place called Art Center, College of Design, and I studied to be a book illustrator. And I thought, yes, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to illustrate books. This is going to be great. This is what I've always wanted, and that's what I'm going to do. And then while I was in school, I ended up showing my work to a production designer and art director from Dreamworks Animation. And the thing is that I hadn't planned on working in animation. I had shown my artwork to these people because at first I wanted to just get feedback. Mm-hmm. And they looked at my paintings and my work, and they're like, you do storytelling illustration, and you paint really wonderfully. How would you like to tell stories with your paintings for us as a background painter? And so, weirdly enough, I'd never considered animation because when I was a little kid living in Chicago, animated films were made by Walt Disney in some magical place far away.
Far away, yeah.
Yeah, and the people that did it were magical people from far away. So I never put two and two together. When I was a kid, there was no internet, there was no access to any of that kind of information. I didn't even know that was a real, you could do that as a job. And so my eyes opened, and they're like, oh my gosh, yeah, that's what I'm going to do. And so I sort of stumbled from being a kid wanting to make cool pictures for storytelling to somebody who painted hamburgers and bottles of beer to then becoming a background painter in animation.
Oh, really cool. And so how did you actually meet these people when you asked, can I get the feedback? Was it in some sketch club or, sometimes it's hard to meet people.
It's a funny story. I'll tell it to you. And probably some of the people in the audience might have heard me talk about this before, but it was a very bizarre story. So when I was in school, I was about halfway through school. Like I said, there was no internet. There was no way of really contacting professionals in the world, short of just picking up a phone and calling them directly, or knocking on their door, or showing up at at their office where they work. So I knew that at my school, every time there was a graduation, professional art directors, creative directors, and production designers would come and look at the senior school artwork. And so I was halfway through school, so I was not a graduate. I had no right to show my artwork. But what the seniors would do is they had this big long hallway in the school, and they would put their artwork up on the walls. Mm-hmm. And then the people from all these different companies would come and look at their portfolios, and if they liked them, they'd get a card and get an interview. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't trying to take anyone's job or go for anything like that, but I had the idea in my mind, boy, it would be great to get the feedback of what these people think about my work. So I have more years of school left, I can improve so that when I graduate, I'll be ready to go. And so what I decided to do is I knew that the artwork was going to be hung down a hall. me and my girlfriend, who's my wife now, but my girlfriend at the time, we broke into school at about 2 in the morning. I took all my artwork. I went down the hallway. All the other students already had their artwork up from the day before. And let me back up. I didn't break into the school. The school was always open, right? But no one's...
You sneak
really,
in. Yeah.
So I went in there because people are always working on their artwork, all hours of the night. So I didn't break a window or anything like that. I just went into the school when no one was around. And then I thought to myself, well, look, when these professional people come to the school, they're going to be given drinks, coffee, wine, whatever, to, walk around, look at the artwork. And if you've ever been to one of these things, they always talk about the artwork. They walked up and down the halls and goes, that's a really nice piece. Oh, it's too bad they didn't do this. Or, oh, I love that. I love the way they'd use a light. I love the way the composition. They actually would say out loud what they think, their feedback. They're talking to each other, right? And so I'm like, all I need to do is get my artwork up on the walls and stand around and listen to them, and I'll find out what they think and how I can improve. So what I did was this. I knew that all those people would be drinking their drinks, looking around the artwork. At some point, they're going to have to go to the bathroom. So what I did was I walked to the end of the hall to where the men and women's washroom was, and I put my artwork neatly around the doors to the men and women's bathroom. And I dressed up in a white shirt and a pair of dark slacks like I was one of the people who was a waiter or giving out drinks, who was working the occasion. And my girlfriend came with me, and we stood near the washroom. I stood next to the washroom to listen to hear what people would say about my artwork. And so what ended up happening, I actually wasn't, when the moment of opportunity happened, I was not standing there. I was standing someplace else talking to somebody, but my girlfriend at the time was standing there, and an art director from Dreamworks saw my stuff. He's like, "Oh my gosh, who is this?" And she said, "Oh, it's me. It's always my boyfriend's work." And basically, she, said, "Would you like to ask your boyfriend to pass my card?" And I got the information, and we sort of connected, and I got invited to go to Dreamworks for an interview.
Cool. And did you do like an internship, or did you start it right away as the background painter?
When I went to when I talked to the lady on the phone, she was just like, I explained to her what happened, what I did, so I wanted to be all truthful. And she goes, okay. She was laughing. She goes, well, I really, really like your artwork, and I'd like some people here to see it. So pull it off the wall and put it in a portfolio and come in. And so I went down and I drove down to Dreamworks and I showed my portfolio. And Dreamworks at this time, they hadn't made a movie yet. They hadn't made Prince of Egypt. So I was being hired I eventually got hired to go on to Prince of Egypt. So I sat in a conference room. There was no furniture because the company was brand new, on the floor. And, the production designer, the art directors, they were all there, and they were like, they looked at my stuff and they were like, this is Dreamworks. This is going to be Steven Spielberg, Jeffrey Katzenberg, and David Geffen's company. We're making an animated film called Prince of Egypt, And then as I was sitting there, Steven Spielberg walked across the room, and he's like, it's his company. And I'm like, oh man, And he goes, and we're looking for background painters. And how would you like to be a background painter? And so I told him I was still in school, and they said, well, that's no problem. How about this? How about you work for us part-time? Mm-hmm. So I started Dreamworks while I was in school. I worked part-time, 2 days a week, until my graduation. And the week after graduation, I came and I started full-time.
Oh, really nice. Yeah. And how was your experience there, learning maybe from others or maybe some stories from that time?
Oh my gosh, it was brilliant. It was probably the best experience, professional artistic experiences I've had in my life. And the thing is that people will often ask me, what's the favorite movie I ever worked on? And that's really tough to answer. But if I have to really, really break it down to the most absolute best experience and best movie, it'd probably Prince of Egypt, because it's where not only my career started, but I met and worked with all these phenomenal people and learned so much. It was a thing that changed my life completely, and it was amazing. I worked with this guy who's directly above me named Paul Lassane, and he was a matte painter. He worked in animation. He worked in live action. He ended up being an art director on Lord of the Rings. He also I mean, he was a production designer on Surf's Up and on the Box Trolls. You know, so he had this long list of skills. And then I worked with all these amazing European designers who came from Amblin Animation, you know, all these sort of French animators and designers and German production designers and art directors. And it was such a huge learning experience, not only from the art, but of the culture. So I was this kid in Chicago, never been anywhere around the world, and suddenly I'm surrounded by the best artists from the U.S., the best artists from France and Italy and Germany and Spain, all pulled together to work on a film, right? And the thing is, I started as a trainee, so it was kind of like, all right, this week you're going to go learn with this person. You know, it was like being in school again, but I'm getting paid to be in school.
Yeah, exactly. Getting paid to learn. Awesome.
Yeah. You know, and so what was great about Dreamworks was I started as a background painter, but eventually I sort of moved through the different departments and worked with a lot of different people who taught me all these amazing skills.
Yeah, wow, yeah. And what was maybe the best thing you learned, if you can pinch out something like an aha moment, you know, to make your artworks better?
I have two, really. It was, you know, I worked with I worked with three phenomenal people in terms of my education in color, in painting. You know, I worked with this gentleman, art director, or actually he was a background supervisor named Ron Lucas. And he was phenomenal in that he was trained by Sergei Bongard, the Russian Impressionist. So I got to learn Russian Impressionist theory, color theory, from him. And then I worked with a guy named Sam Mishlap, who was a phenomenal layout artist at Disney. He came to Dreamworks, and he had such fantastic sort of background in composition and in drawing and layout that was super invaluable. And then I worked with this Chinese artist named Xiaoping Wei, who was trained in the Chinese Academy. And he had an approach to color and painting that was so different than anything I'd experienced. And so the three of those guys had a huge, huge impact on forming my color sort of vocabulary. And then it was plus by people like Paul Lassane, who worked on Lord of the Rings stuff. And then the other, I'm sorry, I gave you a bunch of aha moments, but that was color. That was my color aha moment. And then my other moment was working with this phenomenal Spanish artist named Marcos Mateo. And he has a book out called Framed Ink,
Yes,
which is really wonderful. So he was one of my mentors and my boss on learning how to light for films, for animated films. And those guys, that was it, color and light. So my aha was color and light between some of the most gifted artists that a person could have in their early career.
Wow, yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, and you also drew together maybe, and like during the breaks, or did you get a chance to kind of like give each other feedback?
Well, we would, you know, the thing is that we would paint on the weekends. We'd paint after work, you know, so we would paint and draw. Sometimes we'd do trips together to go, you know, landscape painting, or we would hire a model and paint models, you know, and then, you know, a few of us had our own little personal projects that we would sort of create illustrations for, and then bounce back and forth off of each other for feedback, you know, and that was really cool. Again, it was kind of like we got to be professional students, you know, in a sense. And we'd do our job, but then we was like, okay, you know, we got our work done. Now classroom time begins, you know.
And what were your kind of like time restrictions when you were creating artworks during that time? Like, did you get like a week to create this, or was it like different than it is now in the animation studios?
Oh, you mean like an actual working in animation? Yeah. It was different. You know, the thing is, it was that like in answering that question, it almost means looking at the different stages of where animation was at. So when I started on Prince of Egypt, for example, it was all traditional 2D animation, right? So everything was hand-drawn in terms of the animation. Everything was hand-drawn in terms of the layout. Everything was hand-painted in terms of the painting, right? And so a lot of times your painting physically changed depending on the requirements of animation. So, for example, if you have a long pan shot a shot that's moving across the screen, and you have got, like it's Prince of Egypt, 300 or 400 animated characters, going through, including like maybe 10 or 12 in the foreground. It's a big shot, right? And so sometimes what would end up happening is that the general rule of thumb was your background paintings had to be as big as the animators could make their animation to be overlaid on top and then photographed, right? So some of these paintings would be 10, 12 feet across,
Wow.
I mean, they would be enormous, right? So it wasn't like your computer screen where you just zoom in and you paint something, They were huge. And then on top of it, they were layered in sheets of acetate, because in traditional 2D animation, you use multiplane, sort of like it's a camera that's shooting downwards, and you're taking these different levels and you're moving them slightly at different speeds to create the illusion of depth and movement, right? So you'd paint a background painting, then you put a layer, and then paint the next, thing in top, and then you paint on top. So I remember doing a painting that was, I think it was probably 8 feet, no, maybe six to 8 feet across, and it had 16 levels on it, right? And so one painting, a month. 4 weeks of working like morning till night, kind of thing on that, But then other paintings where you had like a couple of days, because it was just a small, simple shot. So it would always change. And then one of the things, speaking about the difference of things, is we're just talking about production backgrounds. When you're in 2D animation, if suddenly the director is like, oh, this is great, this happens, your paintings and the scene is all in the morning, we change our mind, now this is happening at 11 o'clock at night. So yeah, you'd have a sequence where you might have painted 20, 30, 40, 50 paintings for the scene, if it was a really big, long, complicated scene, and then you'd have a change of time of day, you have to go back in and repaint all those paintings. There's no Photoshop, so it was very labor intensive. I mean, it was great though. But I'd go to work and it'd be, my wife. I had a set of clothes that were for going to work and then for life, because there was always paint on my clothes. Paint on everything. Like I was in school. So when I graduated and started work, I'm like, oh, we're gonna finally have some clean clothes. No, it was all still covered in paint. Now, you fast forward to where things are today, and the computer is a blessing and a curse, and part of it is that it allows you to have an extraordinary amount of output. Like the amount of work you can do and the amount of time you can do is really, really amazing. And the problem is, though, is that because it allows you to do that, it also encourages you to do that, sort of thing. So, like if I know a physical painting will take, like a week or 2 weeks to do, it's kind of like I can do the same thing in a matter of like a day or two, and because you can do one or two in a day, depending on the level of complexity, you might be then asked in a studio situation, like, oh, well, since you're working this fast, why don't you give us like 8 or 9 paintings a week, and you're like, whoa, kind of thing. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should, so I know I'm answering more than what you asked for, but it's both good and bad, kind of thing. And sometimes it's a lot of work, and sometimes it's a little.
Yeah, and have you also ever sometimes just like cooperated on the artworks? Like if you work like 2 background painters on one painting, or like painting in like different things, like moving around stuff.
Oh, well, I mean, the thing is in background painting, in 2D animation, you almost always had to do that, especially when they were big and they were complicated. Like some of the big shots on Prince of Egypt would sometimes have 3 or 4 painters on them because they would just be too big and complex. I mean, in the time that you needed to have it done, sort of thing. So, in CG animation, it's a little bit different because the artists in the art department are not making the artwork that's actually going to physically be on screen. They're making the artwork that then will be interpreted by a whole crew of other artists, technical and computer artists, who will then build all the things and then put it together, and that's what we see on screen, sort of thing. Yeah. So it's a little bit different, there. But like, for example, if you created a bit, like I'll create a street scene in like Inside Out. Right. It might just be all my design, one artist, but then when it actually gets made and put on screen, it might be 10 people who are making it, kind of thing.
And do you get a chance to look at it again, like, oh, the light is not really exactly how I designed it at the beginning in a concept, or when you pass it through down the pipeline, then it doesn't come back for you to see?
Well, it sort of really depends. So when you're just like an art department artist, you're creating the designs, and you might be creating the lighting, and the color and all that sort of thing. But really, what happens is it's the job of the art director to sort of be the in between. So the art director will look at all the artwork being generated by the art department, working with the production designer. They'll put it in front of the director. The director's like, this is exactly what I want. Then they take that artwork and send it over to modeling, and surfacing and lighting, right? And so rather than having the 10 people that work in your department going back and forth to the other department to check on them, they just send like one or two people, usually the art director and production designer, and they go and they look at it and they go, why doesn't this look like what we created? That sort of thing. But and then I'll try and get that, to look like where it is. And then the artist will be invited into a thing called dailies. And the dailies will be a way of looking at what the other departments have created from what you did. And then you can sort of submit notes or thoughts, and they're like, oh, you know what, we did this way, and, it might work better if we follow it. It's one of those very delicate sort of games where you have a lot of people who are working on something. And so it's kind of like, it's a collaborative art form, so there's a lot of like, oh, I see it's different than what we designed, and kind of thing. And then and it's one of those cases where you then go to the director and go, do you like it that way? And if they go, oh, no, actually, I want it to look more like what the art came out of the original artwork, then it goes back. Or if the director says, you know what, I think it looks cooler this way, then, like, okay, you're the boss, So it's a little bit of that. But that's sort of how the pipeline works.
Yeah, and did you get a chance also to present your artworks, or was it as well just to pass it on to different departments when you create something, or write notes like, this is what I wanted to communicate?
Right. No, you have to present. I mean, and that's an important skill too. The thing is that what I think is oftentimes forgotten by people who want to be like concept artists or artists on an animated team is that, your big job is to communicate. Your designs are communicating these ideas, these concepts, right? And so the person that you need to be able to communicate to are the head designer, the production designer, but more importantly to your director. And so the thing is, the director is like, I want a design for a castle. You're just not going to go back to your room and go, wow, here's my castle. Here it is. Here's what you get. Right? No, it's not so much like that. It's going to be a bit of the first round of like, well, here are different ideas for the castle, and then you're putting it in front of the director. And the thing is you're establishing a dialogue, and you're trying to draw out the things that they like, because sometimes directors are not. You have different kinds of directors. The kind that can express themselves and are very visual and can tell you exactly what they want, and then you have directors that are very cryptic and aren't very able to communicate their ideas. And so it becomes this thing where besides drawing, you have to be able to present your work, and then while you're presenting it, be able to ask questions, sort of thing. Like I'm looking at a picture of you right now sitting in your studio, and I'm seeing plants to the side of you, right? And I might go, oh, you know what? Now in my head, I might going, oh, this would be a cooler design if the plants were on the other side of you too.
Yeah. Better concept.
Right. But then I might but I wouldn't just say, hey, we should stick the plants over there. I might say, what might be cool is that we can create a more intimate setting if we were to take the soft forms of the plants on this side and then sort of echo them over to the other side. And it kind of frames the character in a really nice way. So that's my way of suggesting something to the director by giving him a way of thinking, oh, yeah, I could see how that could be helpful. Or, oh, no, that doesn't work because I'm going to have a big dragon crash through the wall 2 seconds later, And so what it is you're sort of communicating. And the thing is with a lot of directors, especially the ones who don't communicate visually or are thinking about visual design, it's because their head's wrapped up in story and animation. And animation is about performance. It's about the acting. Sort of thing. So sometimes they're not thinking about how big a door should be. What kind of door should it be? Is it a stone castle? Is it one made out of wood and timber? They're not. Sometimes they're not thinking of that, and it's your job to paint the picture and to offer them all the toys in the sandbox that they can have to make their story.
Yeah, exactly. It's also when you were mentioning plans, right? What kind of plans, and is it like something, as you mentioned, like a cozy atmosphere, or is it intimidating, scary, or whatever it is, right? Moody.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And do you also, how does your process differ from like working in a studio and when you're working on your own stuff, like do you also draw thumbnails and the same setting with different color variations and different moods?
Yes, and the thing is that the easy answer is I use all of it and to different degrees, because the difference is a lot of the tools that I would use in animation, the 20 years I spent in animation, a lot of them was to find the solution. And sometimes finding the solution was finding out what the director wanted. And when you work in visual development, sometimes you don't even have a story yet. Kind of thing. They're sort of formulating the story. They're formulating a scene. They're formulating, let's say, go back to the example of a castle. What kind of castle is it? And the director may not know, right? And so you might be using your approach or method, or I might be using my approach and method just to find out what they like. And then after I get that, then I go to the next step. Well, what is it about they like they need to convey? And then after I do another artwork to that, then I get down to what should it exactly look like? That's usually the third step. So a lot of times the first three steps of thumbnails to roughs is to create this dialogue back and forth to sort of help me make the exact right kind of design and then offer up design ideas. See, I'm doing all these things so that when I do make a design idea, it will have covered those other things that are important to the director. Now, when you're working on your own project, you are the director. You already a lot of times have a lot of those questions already answered in your head. So sometimes when I design, to be completely honest and truthful, I will literally pick up the paintbrush or the stylus and I know what I want exactly and I know why it has to be, and I'll just bam, hit it, and then it'll be what I want. It doesn't happen all the time. And other times I'm like, I don't know if that's the right solution. And then I'll thumbnail it all out. I'll do 15 different versions, create one up. I'm like, yeah, that's it. And then rewrite the story in my head and like, oh no, that's not even in the story anymore. Boom, it's gone. So it's a bit of the process you used before. And then sometimes it's easier because you're the person writing the story and you're the person who is saying yes or no to everything. And then sometimes it's a curse because you're the one who is saying yes or no to everything. And if you change your mind, same as if your director changed your mind, you have to start all over, So it's similar, but it's, I think, better. And the best thing of it all is it's your project. So every pain and every victory you experience is all worth it because it's yours,
Yeah, definitely, and it's your story, and then you can communicate part of yourself as well in the world and characters, right?
Right, absolutely.
Before we continue, let's take a little break because many of you have been asking me about recommendations for different tools and resources to help you out with many different things like studying, finding inspiration, overcoming artistic block, managing your time, and freelance. So I decided from now on in the episodes I will share with you some of my favorite things which help me a lot, and I'm sure they can help you out too. So let's go take a look. So the first one is Audible, which is the largest audiobook store out there with more than 100,000 audiobooks. And I love listening to stories and learning from books, and even if you are not a book reader, this is a great way to get the knowledge and advice from books just by listening. It would be a shame to miss out on all the great tips if you just don't like to read. I usually listen to audiobooks while I'm traveling, doing housework, or painting. It's very relaxing and I learn a lot. What is awesome, you can get free 30 days trial, which is like getting free books. So try it out for yourself and go to artsideoflife.com/audible. The next one is for all the freelancers and studio owners out there. It's called FreshBooks, and it's an invoice and accounting software that is super easy to use and significantly cuts your time needed for invoicing, getting paid, tracking expense, time tracking, and making proposals. Great part about this is that with few clicks you can export all important data for your tax declaration too. And you can get a free trial 30 days to test it out for yourself too. So go to artsideoflife.com/freshbooks. The last one is trusted house sitters, and as you maybe already know, I love traveling to refresh my inspiration and avoid art blocks, but my budget doesn't allow it so often. Fortunately, I discovered Trusted House Sitters website, where you can do the pet sitting and live for free like a local. I love dogs and cats and all kinds of animals, so it's great win-win. In this way, it's only about buying a flight ticket or travel there by car. Accommodation is for free and you can have great fun with animals, and you can also draw them and practice your animal anatomy skills. It also works for those of you who have pets and are looking for pet sitters to be able to travel. So check it out at artsideoflife.com/ths. You will find more artistic resources, tips, and tools used by me or mentioned in the interviews at artsideoflife.com/resources. So go check it out. And just to let you know, some of the links are affiliate links, which means I will get paid a small commission if you decide to purchase through them, but at absolutely no added cost to you. And in this way, you get a chance to support Artside of Life, which I really appreciate. And now, let's go back to the interview. And how was the transition for you, like from different jobs and kind of job role studios to working on your own? What was going on in your head and your experiences along the way?
Well, the thing is that it was an unexpected thing. Sometimes I like to, when people ask me about my career and what has happened, like with what I'm doing now, I tell them that when I was a kid, I wanted to make artwork for stories, for books, and maybe even create stories. And I ended up having a 20-year career creating artwork for other people's stories, And then it took me 20 years of making artwork for other people to realize that I wanted to make artwork for myself. I wanted to tell stories for myself, kind of thing. And so it was funny. I had to go through those 20 years of doing it for everybody else to realize that, hey, I actually want to do this, for me, kind of thing. And so it was a bit of a shock. And honestly, when I did it, it was just a little side project. I thought, I'm going to make my little story. I'll make some artwork for it. Because originally I'd made this, and I still have. I made this for my son. He asked me to make a story for him and illustrate it, and so I did. And then I was going around to different conventions, mostly to look at portfolios for the studios I was working for, like Pixar, but to show people my artwork so I could maybe get a Kickstarter, fund myself taking an extended vacation and working on it. So I hadn't really prepared for my childhood dream to come true. It's like writing a book and illustrating it. I was like in the back of my head, it's like, man, that'll be great sometime. I'd actually planned for it to happen in my retirement. Like, okay, I'll be an old guy, retired, and then I'll have time to do it, And then somebody wanted me to do it, And so it was a bit of a turn. So, what happens when all of a sudden you get a shot at doing the thing you always wanted to do? You take it, It's scary, but it's a lot like working for a studio. In the end, it comes down to, here's a story. I got to make the artwork. I got to try to make the best story I can, and then you do it, and then you can move on to the next one. You keep trying to make it better and better.
Oh, really cool. And maybe you can mention for some people in the audience who don't know, like how the book came to life, maybe the start, the funding of the book, and, just like, okay, this is happening now. This is real.
Right. Well, so while I was working at Pixar, having a grand adventure, the biggest adventure of my life happened. Actually, it happened just a little bit before Pixar, but I had a kid. I was married. I had a son. And while I was working at Pixar, my son sort of asked me to make a book for him. So I started out, by making what would have been a children's picture book. It would have been, so if you look at the early artwork from the book that I, posted online, it's much more stylized and it's much more kind of young looking. And so I started making images and writing a very, very simple story about this boy who lives on an island of junk, and some pirates come to try and steal his junk, and then the boy builds this big giant robot and scares away the pirates. It's very sweet, very short, very small. And the thing is I never finished it. So I was working at Pixar, working on movies, getting busy, and I never finished the story. And then in a blink of an eye, like close to 10 years goes by, and my son's like, he's like 11 going on 12, and he walks in my office and he looks at this painting I'd painted of this big red robot for his little children's book, and he goes, Dad, you should finish this. You should finish this story for me. And I'm like, I felt super guilty, and I was like, you know what, you're right. I'm going to finish this thing. I'm going to finish it for you. And then he looked at me and said, yeah, well, I'm older now. Can we make it kind of a bigger, older, big boy adventure story? You know, because he read Harry Potter, seen all the movies, Lord of the Rings. You know, he's a 12-year-old boy, you know, kind of thing. And so I said, yeah. And so I said, but I'm not sure where I was going to go with it. And then he kept pushing and pushing. And gave up all these great ideas, and I said, all right, I'm going to do it. And so I started working on the weekends. At night when I got home from the studio, I would write, and I would draw, and I would paint. And then on the weekends, I would do more, writing, drawing, and painting. And so I made it a routine. So every time I come home from work, I would spend at least an hour or two writing or drawing. Mostly I tried to write during the week when the light wasn't as much of an issue. And then on the weekends, I would try and do more art, because then I would have the days to do that, you know. And so I'd wake up. My routines on weekends were to wake up, do stuff with my son, do stuff with the family, then bam, in the studio, you know, kind of thing. And so I did this, started making the artwork seriously for the book, and I started going to some of the conventions to sort of show the work, to try to get, again, like I mentioned earlier, a Kickstarter. But now I was actually serious. I'm going to do it. I'm really going to do it. And so I started doing that. And then a good friend of mine, John Navarez, said, hey, we were at the San Diego Comic-Con. I was looking at portfolios for Pixar. And he goes, look, you want to get people interested in your book? Why don't you take up 2 feet of my table, show people the artwork from it, so that when you announce your Kickstarter, they'll know about it. And so I said yes. And then I went and started showing my stuff there at Comic-Con, and then at Comic-Con, you know, it's sort of, people noticed it, and the publishers noticed it, some of the movie studios noticed it, and they started talking to me, you know, sort of about it. And I started out, you know, getting an opportunity to publish the book for HarperCollins, and it ended up they asked me how many stories I had. I told them, because there was a lot of stories. And actually, there was 6 stories, and they said they were interested in the series. So I signed on to do a 3-book series with HarperCollins, and then it got picked up by Ridley Scott, the movie director, and Scott Free and 20th Century Fox, to be developed into something with Carlos Aldana, the director from Blue Sky, to work on it as a director. And so, you know, I mean, in the interim, what happened, let me back up, was I got the book contract. It was going to be a massive, massive undertaking because I had just been picking at it. I didn't have it all done. I had been picking at it. It was in progress, and I know I needed to really spend time. So I left Pixar so I could work on it full time, and then that's when 20th Century Fox sort of approached, you know, because they had sort of seen it at Comic-Con, and then after it went to HarperCollins, they asked for a copy of it from HarperCollins, and they saw it, and they called me and said, can we show it to some movie directors? And I said yes, and they did, and then I got a call from those folks, and, you know, the rest is kind of where I'm at. So now I work on, you know, I'm no longer working at Pixar on their films, although they've sort of given me the open door to come back and help out on things whenever I want. But in the meantime, I'm working on the books and helping to develop the film. And that's what I'm doing full time right now. I'm working on book 2.
Awesome.
So.
Yeah. And when can we see the maybe the animation or the more books? Do you already have the time plan which you can share, or it's still confidential?
Well, it's you know, the thing is
in
that
the sky.
It's, you know, we're hoping to have them come out soon. What I can say is we're hoping to have them come out sooner than later. So let's, you know, I would say probably in about a year and a half. We'll keep an eye out. You know, if everything goes according to schedule, that's sort of the plan, kind of thing. In terms of the film, you know, films are, you know, we're working on it now, and if all things goes perfectly, the film will come out coincide with a release of a book. So, and book 2 is being worked on right now.
Oh, sounds great. And if you think about maybe some starting artists now, and they would like to create like their own world, or you know, characters in the world, do you always start with the character and then take the story and the world around them, or do you sometimes start also with the world and like, oh, this kind of character would fit in this world, or maybe some tips about the world building?
Right. You know, the thing is about that, what I found, and I'll share this with you, because I have, before this story that I've made, that is getting made, I tried 2 other times to make characters and a story and a world and failed. And so, I'll tell you why I failed. Why I failed was because I think I had the wrong approach. And I'm just speaking specifically from my experiences. But what happened in the first time I tried to do this was, first I started by creating cool characters, right? I had the samurai character. I had this girl, and she was a pirate girl, and she was going to go on an adventure with a samurai. And then I started making character designs like crazy. And then I started making environment designs like crazy, right? I spent, I think, 1.5 years going completely bananas, designing the heck out of characters and world. And then finally, when someone asked me, after I showed all this stuff, asked me, wow, that's so awesome, what's it about? I sat with a long pause going, well, there's this pirate girl, and there's a samurai, and they're going to go and fight, this evil guy, and blah, 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 blah. Anyways, the thing is that I'd spent, in trying to tell the person what the story was about, I couldn't, because I hadn't actually spent the time on story. I spent all my time on design, all my time on making the coolest characters, all my time making the coolest worlds, thinking, the story will work itself out. But in the end, for example, like if you're making an animated film or if you're making a book, in the end, the story is what's going to hold people. It's what's going to hold them. I mean, your characters, Mr. Incredible is so cool and awesome, the adventures he goes on with his family, because you care so much that he succeeds and that he's going to be able to, be a good dad, and his kids are going to love him, and you have to care, right? And the thing is that I hadn't spent the time on story. The second time, I spent all my time on story, right? So what I decided to do in the second time I tried to tackle doing the story is I said, I'm going to pick a story that's already written, so I don't have to think about it. So I took Jason and the Argonauts, like the mythology, and I go, that'll be the story. Now all I have to do is design for it, right? But the thing is, in the end, I picked Jason and the Argonauts because I was going to get to design a bunch of cool monsters, and I'm like, oh, that's going to be fun. I was like, oh, this is going to be fun to design monsters. Ooh, I'm going to design something I like to design. So I wasn't yet still thinking about, I was still thinking, I'm going to be more about story, but I was still thinking about the wrong things. And in the end, what I ended up finding is I started designing some really, really cool stuff. I knew where the story was going to go. I knew what I had to design. But when it really, really got down to it, when I looked at the story, if you've ever really read Jason the Argonauts, Jason's a jerk. He's not a very nice person, He's actually, in the end, he's not, like in the old movies, the movies make him out to be really great. But in the story, he was like kind of not really an awesome person, which is, the Greeks had this thing of like making characters that were flawed, they did jerky things and stuff. And the thing is that I didn't care about the characters. I cared about the look, but I didn't like the characters. I'm like, I don't like these characters. And I'm like, if I'm going to spend all my time after I come home from a 40, 50, 60-hour work week, I want to make sure I'm working on something I care about. Because that was the other thing that was hard, is that if you don't care, it makes it really hard because you have to put in long hours after your week at the studio, to make something great. So why did this last time work? Because I ended up making a story that was about this boy who saves his dad. It was a very simple story. It's just the kid's dad gets taken away, and the kid has to go on an adventure to rescue his dad. And I'm like, wow, like I understood the characters. And the thing is that, I based the main character on my son, right? And I'm like, I had a story that I actually could care about. And then when I put in the long hours after work, it was fun. Because it's like when I made the cool pictures, I knew why I was making the cool pictures, and I knew what I wanted people to care about after they read the words and looked at the art, And so for me, whatever tips I'm trying to give you and your audience is really like, continue to be an awesome artist, but make something that you care about, because it's not an easy thing to make up characters in a world worth having out in the world. So if you can find something you can really, really care about, if you're a good artist, your stuff is going to be here. You find something you care about, it's through the roof, man. And so that's really the thing I would say to people to find. Be honest with themselves and make something worthwhile so that they look at it, they go, oh, this is going to be awesome. because they know it in here. Even if they're doing a bad drawing of it over and over and over, they know it in here. They're going to get there, you know?
Yeah, yeah. And what about your inspirations maybe for the environment? Do you go on locations to do like research or do sketches, or was it from past experiences?
It's all of that. It's all of that. You know, in fact, hopefully not giving anything away that my publisher will be mad about, but you know, like my second book, there's a part of it that takes place in New Orleans, and part of it is years ago when I worked on Princess and the Frog, they sent me to New Orleans to spend several weeks out there, and I was so taken by the culture and the people and the architecture and all this stuff. It had such an indelible impact on me, you know. My first book is set in Chicago. I'm from Chicago, you know, and so it was a bit of a love letter to where I grew up, you know, kind of thing. And so those things have a huge impact, you know, on the worlds I create, you know, and the art as well. You know, it's sort of like when I made the first book, when I ended up making the final first book, it wasn't something super stylized like how I'd set out originally. And what ended up happening was when I started to make the story, I started realizing this was more of an adventure story, like a young teenage boy's adventure story. And so I remembered when I was a young teenage boy reading Treasure Island, illustrated by N.C. Wyeth. And I'm like, oh yeah, and I went and started looking back at the illustrators of the 40s and 50s that made illustrations for adventure stories like Robin Hood, Robinson Crusoe, you know, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And, you know, so like I picked a specific art style that reminded me of the golden age of illustrators doing adventure stories for young boys. And I said, oh, that's what I'm going to do, right? And so there is a lot of that sort of inspiration in this work. When I did, I'm writing a short story now. It's a horror story, and I've put it out on the internet. Like there's an image for it. It's this girl and this vampire kind of thing. And I remember when I did that, I wanted to make something that felt like, if you end up looking at that painting at some point, I wanted to make it feel like the background looked like it was something out of Bambi, like it was like a soft watercolor thing. Yeah. And part of it was because I wanted to sort of juxtapose the things that were scary against this world that was sort of soft and beautiful kind of thing. So I pull inspiration from all these different things that I'm fascinated by, you know, and sometimes it's by things that make absolute sense, like picking N.C. Wyeth for adventure. And then sometimes they make no sense, like picking Bambi for a horror image, you know, but in that case, it was because it was contrast. Yeah. Something seems that much more scary when it's set against something that seems so nice and soft and beautiful, you know, kind of thing. But it's life. I think that, like, the best thing in the world is actually letting life be an inspiration. I love Google. I love the internet, but nothing ever beat I'm sorry, I'm jumping around a little bit, but another place I went, on Prince of Egypt, the studio sent us to Death Valley out in the desert for a couple of days to paint in like 120 degree
heat. When you're sweating and hot and like, oh.
Yeah. And you know what? It shaped my experience. You know, life shapes your experience. I think life is the best point of reference. Google, all that stuff, great, but go out and live life too. You know, and you know, and have it shape you. You know.
Yeah, because also when you're on location, if something really smells or there is a strong light like blinding you, you remember that, right?
Right. Yeah, you remember all these things, and it's unexpected. You know.
Definitely. And when you are on location, how do you kind of note maybe what you see or these experiences? Do you take pictures, or do you just write notes, or do the scribbles, or you just remember?
Well, a little of everything, you know, because sometimes what's funny is that, okay, when you're taking a picture, that's obvious. Like, oh, I like that. That looks cool. You shoot a picture. Or, you know, in some cases, what you do in your sketchbook is actually more important, from the sense that when you have to draw something out, you have to slow down. You have to really look at what you're drawing and going, because here's the thing, it costs nothing to take a picture. Yeah, I want that. That looks cool. That could be useful. Click. That could be useful. Click, right? You're giving it some, I mean, sometimes you're giving a lot of deep thought, but a lot of times you can get very what do you call it, loose with why you're shooting something, because like I could use that, maybe I can't, but maybe I can. When you're sketching, a lot of times, because you know it's going to take you some time to sit down, set up, figure some stuff out, you're making a lot of considerations on why you're sketching whatever it is you're sketching. And so if you put in that time, you're like, whoa, this thing is really important. I could see using that. And you sketch it, and while you're sketching it, because it's fast, it takes longer than this, click, you're thinking the whole time while you're sketching. You're thinking about the possibilities of what this thing could be, or what can spark this idea or that idea. And then you're also writing notes about what it means to you, And so I find then the third component, your memory, is something that is interesting and elusive, because this can happen literally like after you've finished a sketch or an hour later. Sometimes it can be years later, kind of thing. I remember that, when I, like my first book, Timeless, right, there's all this stuff that takes place on different islands. And I remember as a kid, my mom took me to the Philippines, and she took me to this island, and it was called the Thousand Islands, this area in the Philippines. And it was gorgeous. It was like tropical paradise, right? And we're all in the water and swimming around and stuff. And then I noticed that none of the guides were swimming in the water. Like we were jumping off the boat, swimming around. None of the guys, they were all like just looking around, but none of them would get in the water. And I'm like, finally we got back in the boat, and I'm like, why aren't you guys swimming? This is so gorgeous. This paradise here. It's like, oh, this whole place is full of sharks. I'm like, what? I'm like, he goes, oh yeah, this whole area is infested with sharks.
So they're just checking if they're there, yeah.
Yeah, but the tourists love it, so we always take them here. I'm going, and I'm like, oh my God. I didn't know that. But the thing is, I remember it was, it struck me, when I was a kid, that this place could be so beautiful. How could it be dangerous at all, sort of thing. And in the story, the kids in my story, they end up going to this beautiful, gorgeous island, and it ends up being the home of these terrifying dinosaurs, right, that they sort of take for granted. Even they're told, hey, you gotta be careful. But it was the feeling and the design and the look and all that stuff that I wrote and I painted came out flooding back from memories of me being, I went there later on as an older person to the same place my mom took me, and I'm like, it was different. I looked at the place. It was still as beautiful, but I couldn't experience it the same way, right? And so, but years later, because this happened when I was like 6 or 7, I'm 50 now. So when I was about, 47 years old, that experience as a little 6-year-old came back into my head. I was there. I could see everything. And I put it into the artwork, and I put it into the storytelling, So sometimes it doesn't happen from the photo. It doesn't happen from the sketch. It happens from you recalling a powerful memory of a place that connects with you deeply,
Yeah, definitely. Because then you can relate to it in a different way than now or it was before, right? So.
Right. Yeah.
Definitely. And when you were learning about the techniques, like how to render water and the different lighting condition, it was all during the time in the studios, or did you study alongside on the way? Do you have some cool resources you would recommend, oh, this is a nice way to study?
Oh, right. Yeah. No, here's the thing. You should never end up stop learning, right? You're always in a constant state of learning. So I'll talk about the past, and I'll talk a little bit about the present. In the past, when I ended up going to school, the first school I went to for advertising was very specifically trying to teach me the tools that would help me for advertising. And when I went to school again to be a book illustrator, one of the things that was a big plus for that school was that they had a very, very broad kind of foundation, so it's kind of like figure drawing, perspective drawing. It was color theory. It was also graphic design, photography. There was all these things that had nothing to do with specifically what I wanted to do, but they ended up being really helpful in the end that I could not see. Graphic design was immensely helpful. I'm like, I'm going to draw pictures of dinosaurs and people. Why do I need to know about type and, and composition for page layouts and stuff? It was hugely helpful. It was also a lot of discipline. Photography, immensely helpful. I thought, well, I need to know is how to click and shoot, but it was really, really helpful for me. The other thing is that I constantly sought out people who were good at something I specifically was weak at. So not only did I want to go, I want to know how to render better. I want to know how to do this better. But I would specifically, at the top of my list, always put the things that I was the worst at, try it to the top. And that was hard because it sucks to take a workshop or a class where you know you're really not good at that on purpose, you know? Because I remember, because I would just take classes I was good at, and you're like, I started noticing I wasn't getting any better, you know, kind of thing. And so it meant taking people that were tougher and, you know, being willing to be stuck down lower. You know, for me, it's like I love color. I struggled with color, you know, when I was starting. I struggled. And so what I did was I just started seeking out people I wanted to study with who were great at it, you know. So that's one of the things I would say to do. I wasn't being specific about the resource, but I'm talking about more of the approach and attitude. Pick the thing first that you know you need and work on it and bring those things stronger. And in the end, as an artist, you end up having the things you're great at, like phenomenally great at. And you're probably phenomenally great at it because you love it to death, right? But it's worthwhile to try to shoot for being good. Being really, really good, because you'll take good and you'll constantly push it up a little higher, right? But worse is to say, I'm not good at this, and then ignore it, and just concentrate on the things you are good at, because this will come back and haunt you in the end, you know? I remember, I'll give a couple things that were really, really helpful for me. One of them was the Illusion of Life, you know, the book on animation and the way the whole thing animation works is a sort of broad education of like sweeping education of animation. That's a phenomenal resource. I think that I can't speak enough of my former mentor, friend, and colleague, Marcus Mattel, who has a book called Framed Ink out, which will speak to you volumes on composition and lighting. And his companion books, which is the thing Perspective, Frame Perspective 1 and 2, are also phenomenal in that sense of being able to get down to good foundational skills. Now, what I'm talking about specifically is storytelling related, you know, kind of thing, like in those cases, in animation related, but there are other things too that I think are really, really helpful. But in the context of what we're talking about, what I'm doing now, I think those are really, really great. Another big thing that was a huge, had a big impact on me was when I was at Dreamworks, I took a cinematography class, and, you know, I basically learned about why you compose something for storytelling on an image that will be on screen for 3 seconds, 4 seconds, 5 seconds, right? There's a method of thinking in your approach of why you take a picture, why you frame a picture for something that's going to then cut to another picture, right? And so one of the best introductory things, I think, for me was a film called Visions of Light. So it's a film, it's a documentary on like 10 or 12 of the most influential cinematographers from like the 60s through, I'd say, the 80s or 90s. And a lot of these guys are still working now. So these are the same directors or cinematographers that work for Alfred Hitchcock to Martin Scorsese and Steven Spielberg, and, you know, a lot of the visual directors from the past and the present, Stanley Kubrick, all these guys. And here's the thing, what's interesting about this particular documentary is these cinematographers did not look at their cinematography as making pictures. They thought they were making paintings. They were making visual paintings. And they thought about their approach to visual storytelling as making visual paintings that moved in time and space. And so it was really a phenomenal eye-opener for me, right, to now look at films differently. After seeing that film, and on the advice of several mentors, one of the things I started to do is I started to watch my favorite movies that were visual or maybe moved me emotionally or from a story standpoint, watch the whole movie, start it over again, turn off the sound. If you turn off the sound, the thing that you're going to realize that happens is you start to look at it objectively. You start to remember, okay, in this scene, or you should be looking at it more objectively. Here's a scene where, the kid's dad dies, right? And you go, well, what happens actually in the scene, right? And you all of a sudden you see the choices that the director made and the cinematographer made. Here's a kid and a dad. It's pulled back, and then pushing closer, pushing closer, pushing closer. Finally, the dad's like rubs a kid's head, and we've gone really close. And then we have them both in frame, and they're really close and feels intimate. It feels great, and then the dad throws the ball, kid misses it, and he goes off screen. And then you see them being further and further apart, and the dad has a heart attack. Kind of thing. And he's further apart, and he's all in silhouette. I'm talking, this is a scene out of a movie called The Natural, right? And it's one of my favorite cinematographers. But he uses the pictures to tell the story, and the framing, and the cutting, and the editing. Every single thing is firing to make you, and by the way, every shot's gorgeous. But you forget about that because you're like, oh my God, the kid's dead. You care. He's using his tools to make you care, right? And so when I watched this Illusions of Light, and then some of my mentors at Dreamworks sort of pointed these things out to me, and I was like, oh my gosh, I never watched a movie again the same way, right? And so it was an immense part of my education that translates whether I'm making animation, whether or not I'm making a single scene, a one-off piece of artwork just for myself, or if I'm making something like a book, and I'm going to use a bunch of visuals to connect. Because ultimately, whether you're making a gorgeous landscape painting or a portrait painting, or you're doing something in a book or something in an animated film, your goal is to connect. You want to connect. You want to make the person who's experiencing your artwork just, be on that adventure with you,
Yeah, exactly. And just to emphasize the things, right, what you are supposed to feel when you are watching it. If you don't have sound and someone is just listening to something, and then you are like, oh, okay, that means like you're listening and emphasizing the acting, right, in some scenes even.
Right. But look at what we do. Look what you do, right? The thing is that, because we're talking about art, neither one of us are like, oh, I'm going to go out and act. You might, but I know, but you're an artist, you draw, you paint. So what it is that by taking out the sound, you're now taking this visual art form and putting it on a playing field that's closer to the way that you connect, right, kind of thing. And then if you end up working in film, making animation or design for film or books, you're just basically learning from yet another master. I always tell kids, I'll tell you one of the things that disappoints me, so I'm going to go off on a little personal note. What sort of disappoints me a lot of times when I'll look at kids posting their artwork up and they're like, oh, I'm doing a master study of so-and-so who did this thing 3 months ago. And I'm going, nothing against the person you're doing a master study of. But, Michelangelo, John Singer Sargent, I'm like, masters, right? Somebody who happened to do a cool piece of artwork a couple of weeks ago, kind of thing. It might be masterful, but you need to sort of go to the source and learn, what's masterful, kind of thing. And what I mean by that is I'm not trying to take anything away from any of these artists who are trying to emulate who are alive today doing something of a couple of months old. But what I'm saying is too many times, like when an animation artist goes, how do I become a better designer of worlds? And I ask them what they're looking at. And they're like, they list me like 10 animated movies that they look at. And I go, yeah, that's great. Now go to the museum, start looking at, these paintings by Tiepolo. Start looking at these sort of big landscapes by, I give them a list of a bunch of different painters who do paintings. Then I'm like, here are a bunch of different movies. Go look at these movies. But that one's all in Chinese. It's a foreign film. Yes. So I'm not asking you to learn Chinese. I'm asking you to look at how they shot the landscape and looking at how, meaning that you take it all in. You don't just go to I like animation, so I'm going to just look at animation. No, look at all the things that are going to make you a better artist for what you want to do. And I think that's I don't know how it is in answering your question, but that's something I think is huge, in that you have to let yourself take in the beauty and the majesty and the mastery of all these other art forms that are also visual, that can help make you distinguished and much more capable as an artist.
Yeah, because sometimes we can be influenced too much by the social media, because every young artists or new artists are now growing up in this influence, and then that's all you see, and that is just too much maybe sometimes.
Right, and I love social media. Don't get me wrong. I think it's great. I think it's absolutely great. But the thing is that sometimes it's easy to take these things for granted. It's like my son plays guitar, right? And I see how hard he works at trying to do something well. And if I just do nothing but put on YouTube videos of kid geniuses playing guitar, I can easily forget how hard it is. Yeah. How much hard work it actually takes to be that good, right? And I think that sometimes, when you go through the internet, you can do nothing but just look at just only the best stuff ever and just be like, oh, this is what's good, because you're only looking at what's being shown to you, as opposed to going out and trying to find it yourself too, and find it in other places, And I think that when somebody creates something new, they're not going to be creating something new by simply emulating something that someone has already done. Obviously it makes sense, right? When you hear it said out loud, it's like, oh yeah, but they're creating something new by going out and looking at something and internalizing it and making it important for them. So, and that's what's important. It's funny, before we had our interview, my wife was kind of walking through the room here, and I'd shown her an interview you had with, oh my gosh, I totally mispronounce her name all the time, Louise, her shortened name, right?
Oh, Lois, you mean?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Right?
Because there was also Louis, that's why I'm like,
No. Yeah. And my wife's like, oh, her work is beautiful. It's like, wow, I see a lot of people who do her look. And I go, well, yeah. That's the thing. I remember getting a portfolio review, and I had all these kids who wanted to do environment design. And I'm like going, every other kid was basically making something look like Craig Mullins, or one of the other big people out there. And I go, well, that's great. You've shown me you can copy somebody, but show me that you can solve a problem, kind of thing. And a lot of times when I've taught visual development classes, I will force students to work on I'll do something like this. I'm like, great, here's a story. I'll give them a story like Little Red Riding Hood, right? Okay, you're going to illustrate Little Red Riding Hood. But here's what you're going to do when you illustrate it or design for it. You have to pick another culture. You have to pick Chinese or African or Eskimo. I give them that's your choice. You have to pick one of these three cultures, and you have to set it in this century, right? So I'll get kids who are like, I just want to do sci-fi stuff. I'm like, well, you know what? That's not you weren't trying to get a design job. You have to think like a designer. You have to think like, I'm going to create the coolest design for the story that someone wants me to create, And what ends up happening is then they can't go to the internet and go, oh yeah, this is how somebody does a spaceship. Oh, here's it. They have to actually go and research and problem solve and think for themselves. And it's good. And I'm not saying that anyone who likes to do sci-fi stuff that they should stop doing that. No, not at all. I love doing sci-fi stuff. But you have to force yourself to be able to think like a designer who happens to love science fiction rather than this is what I do and this is all I do. Because you're limiting yourself to how you can grow,
Solving a design problem, yeah. Definitely. And if you think about actually the art career, and what was maybe your most difficult time, and what you learned from it, like a key takeaway, if you can share that story.
Okay, I won't mention the director of the project, but I had an opportunity to work on a really cool project with some cool folks, and it was a project that was almost doomed from the start. It was the story was okay, wasn't very, very great. The amount of time and resources we had to do it in were ridiculous and too short, but we decided to do it anyways. And at the point where I worked so hard, I pretty much put myself in a hospital. I got so sick, I had placed the value of work higher than my own health, right? And the thing is that it's hard to be objective, especially when you're a young artist. This didn't happen when I was a young artist, but I wasn't an old artist either yet. I was probably in my mid-30s. So when I started my career at Dreamworks, I was in my mid to late 20s. I'd say maybe mid-20s kind of thing. But the thing is that when you're in your 20s and you're thinking, I can work 80 hours a week, kind of thing, you're like, okay, yeah, and I did. I've done that. I've done that in my career. Every artist who's worked in animation has, or in film. But it's not sustainable, kind of thing. Because if you look at what 80 hours a week is like, you're talking about Okay, working at like 7 in the morning till 2 in the morning, 7 days a week, right? And the thing is that that's not sustainable. You're going to get hurt. You're going to get unhealthy. The other thing is in the bigger scheme of things, you're not doing yourself or your industry any service either, because a lot of times what ends up happening for young artists is they work for free because they think, oh, this is a way to keep the job. This is a way to make the best impression. But in the end, you're undervaluing yourself and you're sort of leading the way for people to take advantage of you, right? So I know it's not specifically an art thing. This is more of an art career thing, a common mistake, because people don't value enough what they do. And so, like, for example, I find in the gaming industry, this is the worst sort of examples where you have game companies, I'm not calling anyone out specifically, but what I've seen time and time again with some game companies is that they will keep their senior staff and they will just basically hire on a crew of kids right out of school, work them to death, pay them very, very little, and then let them go. And then hire another set of kids, do the same thing, let them go, kind of thing. And if as artists we allow ourselves to be taken advantage of, we don't value ourselves enough, you won't have the career that you set out to make, and you'll end up being very angry and paying a terrible price for it. And no one deserves that, because you know what? What we do is one of the hardest and most rewarding things in the world, to be able to, if you got the calling, you got called. You started drawing with that pencil or paintbrush. You weren't thinking at any point ever as a kid, oh yeah, I'm gonna make a lot of money doing this. I'm gonna make a lot of money doing it. No, and the thing is that you're doing it. I'm doing this now because I'm not that good at any other things. I mean, I'm good at a few things, but I don't love anything else like I love this. And so if you take that for granted, if you don't treat it with the respect, your passion, your dedication deserves, you're not doing yourself any favors. So hold yourself and what you do with the highest regard and treat yourself with respect. That is the thing. Because at one point, I forgot that. At one point, I thought making someone else's project happy. Here's the thing. In the end, I didn't even really like the work I was doing because I was working so hard. I wasn't enjoying it, kind of thing. And then I'm like, my wife is like, oh my God, you went to the hospital. You had pneumonia, It's like, is it worth? And then I started thinking, it's not even something that is mine, like my own project kind of thing. Exactly. So that's it. That was the lowest part in my artistic journey, is when I put myself in a hospital from working, and we'll try not to do that again.
Yeah, that's a good thing right now, and you know how to plan, and what is your plans for the future, and I would like to know what is your maybe dream scenario in 10 years, and what would you also be like to be remembered for in 100 years?
The thing is that right now I basically live every day in shock, because when I was a little kid, I wanted to make up. I remember reading 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and I remember thinking, I want to make a cool story like this, and I want to make really, really cool art. I want to make up stories and make art. That's what I wanted to do as a kid. And now, almost 50 years later, I had a chance to do it, and I was like, wow, it's amazing. And it's hard, but it's amazing. What I'd love to be doing in 10 years, I'm hoping to be doing the same thing, because I have never felt, and this isn't about money or anything else, but I'll tell you something. I'm having a hard time putting this into words. I'll put it to you this way. I would go to different conventions and things, and I'd bring my artwork from Disney and Dreamworks and Pixar, and I'd show people. They're like, oh, man, that's amazing. And then at the time when I was first working on this book, I would have maybe 6 or 7 paintings from my book, this thing I created. And I'd put that up next to my portfolio. And when kids and adults were all going, what's that about? I want to know more about that, kind of thing. And they weren't asking me about the next Pixar film I was working on. They wanted to know what the story was that I was creating, what the characters, who they were like, what's going to happen next. At that moment that happened was a moment, this is tying into your last question, was a moment that I realized that, hey, something that I make has value to other people. Not something I made for, Pixar, not something I made for Dreamworks, but me, little old me, sitting in my studio, drew and painted this thing, came up with this idea, and people like that. They want that, and they want me to do it. And I'm like, oh, it was the greatest thing I ever felt. And it was every time I go and I meet a kid who is like, I read your story, I look at your characters, what happens to him next? I was so scared, I was so blah, blah, blah. I'm going, oh my gosh, it was, I can, it made a difference. I can do something that makes a difference, that because I made it. So I'm hoping I'm doing that in 10 years. And in the end, 100 years from now, I hope that any kid 100 years from now can pick up the same thing and still have that same experience. That to me will be success, not money or anything else. It'll be if a kid can pick up my book 100 years from now and go, whoa, that's cool. What happens next?
Yep.
That's all I need.
That's super nice. Yeah. And before we say goodbye, maybe you can share last piece of advice and key takeaway, and then we will slowly finish.
Okay. Animation, film, all these things, they're amongst the greatest sort of pursuits you can have if you want to do those things. And if you want to make your own stories and your own images, it's, my hat's off to you. It's going to be an amazing journey. And the thing that I will say about that journey, no matter which way and which course it takes, is be willing to be completely fearless in your passions. Be willing to be fearless in accepting that you will sometimes fail, and knowing that every single failure, if it's in your heart to move forward, brings you that much closer to your next victory, to the ultimate victory, your success, the only one that matters to you inside. So fail to achieve, fail to learn, and with each learning, you get closer.
Yeah, definitely. I totally agree. And thank you so much again for being here. It was so nice.
No, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, and thanks everyone who joined today as well, and see you guys in the new episode. Bye!
Bye-bye.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you being here, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe because I post new videos every week. I will be also super happy if you let me know your thoughts in comments and give the video a thumbs up. You can find all the resources mentioned in this episode at artsideoflife.com. Just type a guest name in the search bar. There is also a couple of free artist resources ready for you. So if you want to listen to the interviews on the go too, make sure to check out the podcast at artsideoflife.com/podcast. Continue to inspire each other, and I will see you guys in the next episode. Bye!